She was pregnant, but the baby wasn't mine. My parents, David and Caroline, never outright said they hated me, but their disappointment was a constant, suffocating presence in our home, a third parent sitting at the dinner table. It started early. I was born with a minor congenital disability, a condition that resulted in my body producing lower levels of testosterone than a typical male. It was manageable with medication, a non-issue in the grand scheme of things, but to them, it was a fundamental flaw, a crack in their perfect family portrait. At 4 years old, after a battery of tests confirmed this, they seemed to decide I was broken, a project that needed to be fixed. Their chosen solution, the tool to hammer me into the shape of a proper man, was my older sister, Jess. She was their golden child, their perfect, beautiful, effortlessly charming firstborn, and I was to be her shadow, the cautionary tale that made her shine all the brighter. Their methods for my rehabilitation were a masterclass in psychological cruelty, so insidious and consistent that for a long time, I thought it was normal. I thought I deserved it. I remember one Christmas with a clarity that still stings. I was 12 and Jess was 15. We had both circled the same glossy mountain bike in the Sears catalog for weeks. On Christmas morning, she of course got hers. It was a magnificent thing. Bright purple, shiny chrome fenders, big knobby wheels, a wicker basket on the front. It was everything a 15-year-old girl who ruled her suburban kingdom could want. I waited with a frantic, hopeful knot of excitement in my stomach, scanning the dwindling pile of presents under the tree, sure that a matching, boy-colored version was waiting for me. Finally, my mom handed me a small, soft, rectangular package. I remember the feeling of the cheap wrapping paper under my fingers. I tore it open to find a cheap, bubblegum pink t-shirt. Printed across the chest in glittery, cursive letters were the words, "Jess's little bro." I looked up at them, my vision blurring with hot tears of confusion and humiliation. My dad just grunted from his armchair, not looking up from the newspaper. "Wear it," he said, his voice flat. "Maybe it'll put some hair on your chest." Their twisted logic, as they explained it to me later in a rare moment of parental guidance, was that by systematically destroying my self-worth, I would be forced to rebuild myself from the ashes. In doing so, I would magically restore my masculinity and jumpstart my testosterone production. It was junk science filtered through the lens of their own deep-seated prejudices. As you can probably guess, their method backfired spectacularly. I became an ever more depressed and anxious kid, retreating further and further into myself with every calculated blow to my ego. But by then, they didn't seem to care about the cure anymore. The experiment had failed, and they had lost interest. Somewhere along the line, their bizarre mission had morphed into simple, harsh favoritism, bordering on emotional neglect. They just seemed to enjoy the power dynamic, the casual cruelty of it all. It was their normal. School became my only refuge. It was the one place where the rules were clear and my efforts were consistently rewarded. I could control my grades. I could excel. But even my academic successes were twisted into failures in the funhouse mirror of our family life. One semester in high school, Jess, who skated by on charm and minimal effort, came home with a B- in chemistry on her report card. My parents were ecstatic. They paid for a custom vinyl banner to be hung across the front of our house, right above the garage. It had a giant, professionally taken, smiling picture of her face, and in huge, bold letters, the words, "Our daughter got a B-." So proud. Our neighbors must have thought we were insane. That same semester, I came home with straight A's, a perfect 4.0. I received no banner. I received no good job, not even a pat on the back. In fact, it was worse than nothing. I came home from school the next day to find my bedroom completely trashed. My books were swept off the shelves and spine up on the floor, my clothes pulled out of drawers and thrown in a heap, my neatly organized desk in a state of utter chaos. My mother was standing in the doorway with her arms crossed, a look of cold disapproval on her face. "Straight A's aren't straight A+s," she said, her voice devoid of any warmth. "Don't get lazy." After that, almost nothing that did surprise me anymore. I learned to expect the worst, to build a fortress around my heart and my hopes. When I got accepted to a solid university with a partial scholarship, they called me their biggest disappointment for not getting a full ride. I had failed, yet again, to be perfect enough. Meanwhile, Jess practically flunked out of her senior year of high school, using the flimsy excuse of wanting to find herself during a gap year that stretched into 5 aimless years of living at home and working part-time at a tanning salon. To celebrate this monumental achievement of hers, my parents threw her a massive bon voyage to adulthood party and bought her a brand new, top-of-the-line laptop to aid her creative journey. The moment I turned 18 and graduated high school, I was out. I moved into a cramped dorm room and never looked back. I worked multiple jobs throughout college, waiting tables, stocking shelves, tutoring underclassmen, doing whatever it took to pay the portion of my tuition the scholarship didn't cover and keep my distance. But the emotional hooks they had sunk into me were long and sharp. When I couldn't afford a plane ticket to come home for Thanksgiving one year, my father's response was a guilt-laden text. "Well, I guess your priorities are elsewhere now. We understand." It was a masterclass in passive aggression, designed to make me feel like a terrible, ungrateful son. Family gatherings, when I could afford to attend them, became elaborate torture sessions of subtle digs and backhanded compliments. Still at that little starter job? My mom would ask loudly at the dinner table, knowing full well I had just been promoted. "That's nice. Jess is thinking about starting her own online boutique, you know? She's always been so entrepreneurial." My college graduation should have been a triumphant day. It was the culmination of years of relentless hard work, of sleepless nights in the library, of proving them and their low expectations wrong. They arrived late to the ceremony, complaining loudly about the traffic and the parking. My father's first comment to me, as I stood there sweating in my cap and gown, clutching my diploma, was, "4 years for that degree? Seems like a lot of time and money for what you'll be doing." What made the day even more bitter was watching them fawn all over Jess, who had deliberately worn the most extravagant, brightly colored, attention-grabbing dress she could find. It was my day, but she made sure she was the center of everyone's universe. Despite everything, for years I tried. I really, truly tried to maintain some semblance of a relationship with Jess. She was still my sister, and a foolish, hopeful part of me held out for the possibility that one day, as adults, she'd see me as her brother, not her competition. But it was a completely one-sided effort. I called to check in, and she'd either ignore my calls for weeks, or when she did answer, she would somehow turn every single conversation into a bizarre contest I didn't even know we were playing. If I got a promotion, she would suddenly have an amazing new business opportunity on the horizon that was sure to make her a millionaire. If I started dating someone, she would immediately be in a serious, soulmate-level relationship with a man who was, of course, far more successful and handsome than my girlfriend's partner. It was exhausting. It was pathetic. I had all but given up on the idea of a close family, resigning myself to a life of solitude, of finding fulfillment in my work because I was so sure I'd never find it in a real, loving relationship. And then, at one of Jess and Dwight's many, many housewarming parties, they moved nearly every year to a bigger, better house my parents always helped finance. I met Josephine. And for the first time in a very long time, the future didn't look quite so lonely. She was one of Jess's short-term friends. The kind of interesting, intelligent person who would orbit Jess's world for a few months before Jess grew bored or threatened and cast her aside. I was doing my usual routine at these events, standing alone near a bookshelf, nursing a single beer, feeling as out of place as a vegan at a butcher's shop. That's when she walked up to me. She had shoulder-length brown hair, intelligent, kind green eyes, and a warm, genuine smile that made me completely forget my own name in the middle of our introduction. "Not much of a party person?" she asked, her voice laced with a gentle, knowing amusement. "Not much of a Jess's world person," I replied, the words slipping out before I could stop them. I braced myself for her to be offended, to defend her friend. Instead, she laughed, a genuine, lovely sound that cut through the dull roar of the party. "Ah," she said, her eyes twinkling. "You must be the mysterious brother I've heard so little about. The one with the conventional life choices." We spent the rest of that evening tucked away in that corner, talking about everything and nothing. We discovered a shared love for classic literature and terrible B-list sci-fi movies. We talked about our dreams, our pasts, our families. It was effortless, the easiest conversation I had ever had. By the end of the night, I had her number, a date plan for the following weekend, and a feeling of hope that was both thrilling and terrifying. When Josephine and I started dating, my parents' reactions were predictably, painfully awful. My mother, after meeting her for the first time over a tense dinner, remarked with a pitying tone, "She's so cultured and well-traveled. It's surprising she's interested in someone so local." The way she said the word local made it sound like a terminal illness, a character flaw I could never overcome. My father was, as always, more direct. "Does she know what you make at that job of yours?" A woman like that, they usually have higher expectations. Oddly, Jess became hyper-interested in my life for the first time ever, constantly asking about Josephine. She'd call out of the blue, pretending to want to catch up, but every single conversation would inevitably pivot to a string of probing questions about Josephine's job, her family, her hobbies, her past relationships. It was strange, but I was so starved for any kind of positive attention from her that I mistook her intrusive curiosity for genuine interest in my happiness. Josephine and I moved in together after a year of dating. It was, without a doubt, the happiest I had ever been. We were a team, a real team. We both had solid careers we were passionate about. We traveled when we could. We spent our nights and weekends building a life together. Our apartment wasn't fancy, just a simple one-bedroom in a decent neighborhood, but it was ours. We painted the walls a calming shade of green ourselves, a disastrous but hilarious weekend project that ended with more paint on us than on the walls. We assembled IKEA furniture while laughing at the incomprehensible, wordless instructions. We created a home that felt safe, warm, and happy, all the things my childhood home had never been. I never thought I could feel this content. Josephine told me one night as we sat on our secondhand couch, eating takeout Thai food from the paper cartons. My parents were always like yours, in a way. Always push for more, bigger, better. But this is enough. You're enough. Hearing those words from her felt like the sun coming out after a lifetime of rain. On our 5th anniversary, I proposed. I planned a quiet dinner at home, which was our favorite kind of night. I'd spent months saving for the ring. Nothing ostentatious, but a beautiful, simple emerald that perfectly matched her eyes, set in a delicate white gold band. I'd hidden it in her favorite dessert, a chocolate souffle, a notoriously difficult dish that I'd secretly practiced making a dozen times in our tiny kitchen to get it just right. When she took a bite and her spoon hit something hard, her eyes went wide with confusion, then with dawning comprehension. When she pulled out the ring, slick with chocolate, her eyes filled with tears. "Yes," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion, before I could even manage to get the question out. 1,000 times yes. When we told my family about our engagement, their reactions were as disheartening and predictable as ever. My mom plastered on a fake, tight smile and said, "How nice," in a tone that suggested she'd just been told her car was being towed. My dad just grunted and muttered, "We'll see," before turning his attention back to the football game on TV. Jess, however, had the strangest reaction of all. She congratulated us, but her smile was weird, unsettling. It didn't reach her eyes. It was almost predatory. "Let me see the ring," she demanded, grabbing Josephine's hand before I could intervene. She examined it with a cold, critical eye. "Oh, it's cute. Very simple, I guess. That's more your style. Anyway." Later, I overheard my mother telling Josephine in the kitchen, in a low, conspiratorial voice, "Don't rush into anything, dear. You're still young. There are plenty of opportunities out there for someone like you." The implication was clear. I was a dead end, a waste of her potential. The year that followed was a stressful blur of wedding planning and long hours at work for both of us. We were trying to save for the wedding and a down payment on a house, and the pressure was immense. We weren't seeing each other as much, our comfortable date nights dwindling to quick, exhausted dinners before one of us had to get back on our laptop to finish a project. I told myself it was just a phase, a rough patch that every couple goes through before a major life event. But in hindsight, the clues were there like bright red flags I'd been willfully colorblind to. Josephine became surgically attached to her phone, quickly angling the screen away from me whenever I walked into the room, claiming it was just work stuff with a nervous, high-pitched little laugh. She started going out more with her friends, coming home late, smelling of wine and a sharp, unfamiliar cologne that wasn't mine. But I trusted her. I trusted her completely. The thought that she might be cheating, especially with someone in my own toxic family, was so far beyond the realm of possibility that it never even crossed my mind. Then, about 3 months ago, Josephine started acting strange. She was moody, irritable, and constantly nauseous. A wild, hopeful, and incredibly naive thought sparked in my mind. Maybe she was pregnant. We hadn't been actively trying, but we had talked about having kids eventually. I let my imagination run wild. I started daydreaming about it constantly, picturing her with a small baby bump, picking out nursery colors, feeling the baby kick for the first time. I started leaving pregnancy books on her nightstand, researching the best pediatricians in our area during my lunch breaks. "You'd be such an amazing mom," I told her one evening as we cuddled on the couch, rubbing her stomach gently. She stiffened, then burst into tears and rushed to the bathroom. I assumed it was just the hormones and gave her space. Then, one night, she sat me down on that same couch. Her face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed and full of a terror I didn't understand. Tears were streaming down her face as she dropped the bomb that detonated my entire world. She was pregnant, but the baby wasn't mine. I was stunned into a complete, roaring silence. My mind went completely blank. I couldn't process the words. We hadn't been intimate as much lately, with the stress and the long hours, but this was impossible. "What?" I finally managed to choke out, the word feeling like sandpaper in my dry throat. When I asked her, my voice trembling, who the father was, she broke down into shuddering, gut-wrenching sobs and whispered the 3 words that imploded my life. "It's Jess's husband." My world tilted on its axis and then shattered into a million pieces. Everything went quiet, like the sound had been sucked out of the room. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. All I could feel was the crushing, suffocating weight of a betrayal so profound, so absolute, that it felt cosmic. "Dwight." I managed to choke out, the name tasting like acid in my mouth. "My sister's husband. Dwight." Josephine nodded, her face contorted with a guilt that seemed, in that moment, entirely insufficient for the magnitude of her crime. "I'm so sorry," she sobbed, staring at the floor, unable to meet my eyes. "I never meant for it to happen. It just did." "How long?" My voice sounded alien to my own ears, flat and empty, like it was coming from a great distance from a man I no longer was. "3 months," she admitted, her voice a barely audible whisper. "It started at your parents' anniversary party." I remembered that party vividly. My parents' 40th, a lavish, ostentatious event they'd spent months planning. Josephine had looked stunning in a new blue silk dress, and I'd been so proud to have her on my arm, my beautiful, intelligent, loving fiancée. I recalled how she disappeared for nearly an hour, claiming she needed fresh air, that the room was too warm and stuffy. Dwight had been absent around the same time. I hadn't thought anything of it. She tried to explain between sobs, the ugly, sordid details spilling out. Apparently, it had started even earlier than that, at our own engagement party. Dwight had cornered her by the bar, telling her she was making a mistake marrying me, playing on all her deepest insecurities. He told her he could give her the life of excitement and luxury that I never could, that I was boring and unambitious, that I was wasting her potential. He had been persistent, sending her texts, making little comments about how my family treated me, planting seeds of doubt about how they might one day treat our children. He made her feel special, desired, telling her the classic cheater's line that he and Jess were basically just roommates, that their marriage was a sham. "And you believed him?" I asked, my voice cracking with disbelief. "After 6 years together, after everything we built, you believed what that mediocre, gold-digging salesman said about me." I kicked her out that night. I couldn't stand to look at her, to be in the same room as the woman who had so completely and utterly betrayed me with my own brother-in-law. She begged, she pleaded, she cried that she loved me, that it was a mistake. But all I could see were the months of lies, every late night at the office, every girl's night out. I told her she had 30 minutes to pack a bag, and that anything she left behind would go in the trash. "Where am I supposed to go?" she wailed, her hands clutching at my shirt. "I don't know, Josephine," I said, my voice as cold as ice as I peeled her fingers off me. "Try Dwight's office, since you're so familiar with it. Or maybe one of those hotel rooms you enjoyed so much. It's not my problem anymore." After she left, my apartment feeling cavernous and silent, I called Dwight. The conversation was a blur of pure, white-hot rage. He initially tried to play it cool, to downplay it, claiming it was just a drunken mistake that meant nothing. When I told him she was pregnant, his tone shifted. He got defensive. He got cruel. "Well," he sneered, his voice dripping with smug satisfaction, "maybe if you'd been a better fiancé, she wouldn't have had to come to me for what she needed." He then had the audacity to say that he and Josephine had connected on a level that she and I never did. "You've always been jealous of what Jess and I have," he said, twisting the knife. "Now I've got Josephine, too. Think about that while you're all alone in that pathetic little apartment of yours." I saw red. I grabbed my keys and drove straight to their house, my only plan to confront him face to face, to wipe that smug look off his face. When I burst through the front door, my parents were already there. Dwight had called them the moment he hung up with me, spinning some self-serving sob story about how Josephine had relentlessly seduced him and he had made a terrible, one-time mistake. And of course, they believed him. My mother was sitting on the couch next to him, patting his shoulder consolingly. "Are you serious right now?" I roared, my voice echoing in their pristine, beige living room. "He cheated on your daughter with my fiancé, and he's the victim here?" My mother immediately started lecturing me about forgiveness and family unity. They said I needed to support Josephine through her pregnancy because family comes first. They told me Jess was upstairs, resting, but that she was willing to work through this with Dwight because that's what mature adults do. Dwight just sat there, soaking in their sympathy, playing the part of the contrite husband who had been led astray by a wicked temptress. That's when years of bottled-up resentment, of being the second-best son, the disappointment, the afterthought, finally exploded. I told them exactly what I thought of their twisted loyalty, their hypocrisy, their lifetime of casual cruelty. I told Dwight he was a pathetic, cheating, spineless coward. And I told my parents that they could have the perfect family they always wanted with their perfect daughter and their perfect son-in-law, because as of that moment, they no longer had a son. I stormed out, ignoring their calls and pleas. The days that followed were a black hole of misery. I didn't eat, I didn't sleep. I just sat in my now silent, empty apartment, the ghost of Josephine haunting every room. The voicemails and texts flooded in, a relentless barrage of guilt and manipulation. My parents, demanding I grow up and make amends for the scene I caused. Jess, surprisingly, texted me, her message cold and detached, as if discussing a business transaction. "I've forgiven Dwight, and you should too. The baby is innocent in all this. We need to come together as a family for its sake." Not a single word about her own pain, not a shred of empathy for mine. Just the same old family script. Protect the favored ones at all costs, and blame me for not falling in line. After a week of this psychological siege, my boss called, concerned about my sudden absence. I broke down and told her everything. In an act of kindness so profound it made me weep with gratitude, she offered me a temporary transfer to our company's Seattle office. It might help to have some distance, she said gently. A change of scenery. I accepted immediately, packing my life into boxes with a numb efficiency. It's been 3 months now. I moved into a small apartment in Seattle, changed my phone number, and started therapy. But they won't let me go. They tracked down my new workplace and have started showing up, trying to ambush me into a forced reconciliation. My mother in the parking lot, wailing about how I'm tearing the family apart. My father leaving harsh voicemails telling me to man up and be a man. They've even sent flying monkeys, aunts, uncles, cousins I haven't spoken to in years, to bombard me with messages about the importance of forgiveness. Yesterday, I got a message from Josephine, forwarded through a cousin who refused to respect my boundaries. She's keeping the baby, a boy, and she and Dwight are planning to co-parent. My parents are apparently thrilled to be becoming grandparents, all previous sins washed away by the promise of a new baby to dote on. She even had the audacity to say she hopes we can all be friends one day, for the child's sake. And then, the final brutal slap in the face. She told me they're thinking of naming him David, after my father. The ultimate act of erasure, ensuring my parents would forever overlook any wrongdoing in favor of their new, perfectly named grandchild. So that's where I am, drowning in a sea of betrayal and gaslighting, with my own family trying to force me to play the role of happy uncle to the child conceived from the affair that destroyed my entire life. But what they don't know is that my move to Seattle wasn't just about getting distance. It was about strategy. My lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman my boss recommended, has already sent a formal cease and desist letter to my parents, to Jess, and to Dwight, detailing their harassment of my workplace and threatening a restraining order if it continues. I've blocked every single one of them, every flying monkey, every possible avenue of contact. The silence is strange at first, but it's a clean, healing kind of quiet. I've started exploring my new city, hiking in the lush green mountains on weekends, finding a sense of peace I've never known. My therapist says that the opposite of love isn't hate. It's indifference. I'm not there yet. The anger still burns hot and bright on some days. But for the very first time in my life, I can see a future on the horizon. A future where their names are just a footnote in my story, not the headline. A future where I finally get to be the main character in my own life, free from the suffocating shadow of the golden child and the parents who never saw the son they actually had.